Good afternoon. We are visiting this afternoon with Dot Scott, president of the NAACP. Good evening, Dot. How are you today?
I am fine. I'm glad to have you here at the Charleston branch of the NAACP.
So glad to visit. Just go ahead and tell me what's on
Well,
your
there's
heart.
a lot of things that's on my mind, particularly I think some of the things you and I shared just off camera about what we and some of the other leaders are talking about are the things that have stayed on our minds, and we're continuing trying to work toward it. One of the things that sets high seam on all of our agenda is the death of our youth. And the sad thing about it is the fact that we have all of these homicides pretty much contained within our communities, where our children are actually killing one another. And well, sadly enough, when we start counting the fatalities and we're thinking one person died today, actually every time there's a death of any youth, we've lost a minimum of 2 youth, the one that did the perpetrator and the victim. But more times than that, that number triples or quadruples. So what do we do about that? I think that when we look as to who needs to fix the problem, I think there's enough of finger pointing to go around to a lot. And while I believe a lot of it does start at home, because we have to look back as a people and see the kinds of issues that we dealt with that were far different, but just as intense for us, and we were able to raise children, at least our parents were able to raise children, and very rarely, if ever, you heard of children killing children. So I think that the society that we live in, we've gotten to a point where we're desensitized about the death in and of itself, and with the lack of education, the prevalence of parents who are young parents who really aren't prepared to be parents. I think those contribute greatly to the situation that we're in with our children. But I still think that those of us who have the insight, foresight, a wherewithal to make a difference, most of us are not. I don't know whether we feel comfortable as to where we are and until it hits home, because oftentimes folks who would never even talk to the NAACP or consider the NAACP, when it hits home, it's almost like a reminder. You're reminded that this is the society you live in. We are African Americans. These are some issues sometimes uniquely just about us. So I think that we who have the resources, or maybe the connection, or the ability to organize and make a difference, we're just not doing it. We're just not doing it. I had a recent opportunity in this past month, the Black History Month, to speak at different churches. And one of the things I think that it's disheartening to me is those of us who hold ourselves out as Christians, and we speak not of the fact that I've got faith in this, but there's no work to go with it. And while the faith and the lack of work will not keep you from salvation, it does say very clearly in the Bible that He rewards you according to your work. And I think it's hard for me to understand those of us who know about the devastation that these children are dealing with, and the killing, and some of the parents who, as much as they struggle, because every child who's out there doing something that's really bad or getting in trouble or killing, that doesn't mean that parents hadn't done everything that they possibly could. They have limited resources, and while we're still fighting for things we shouldn't still be fighting for, like fighting for education, there should not be a fight for education for our children, but we know that fight is still there. So when I hear folks talk about the parents, I keep in mind also that those parents did not get what they needed. So you can't give something you don't have. So if you don't know how to be a parent, that cannot be transferred to your children. But I think we as Christian, and I lean strong on that because I believe that even during the inception of the NAACP, but for us believing in something bigger than us, we were listening to the old "It's Not the Negro Hymn" while we think it is Amazing Grace the other day at the service that I spoke with. And the thought of that song, when this song was actually being sung, we were talking about people who were actually, these are slaves that were actually in the belly of a ship. And they were talking about Amazing Grace. And I said, if these people had the heart and the belief and the faith that, in spite of what my lot is now, that things are going to be better, it's hard for us to believe that those of us who can walk out the door and decide what car we drive, not if we've got a car, and if we can be in one part of the house and don't know who's in the other part of the house, and yet we're walking out there and not thinking about what we need to do. We are so good about having conversation among ourselves, but when you talk about organizing, let's get together and let's do something. That's the part that never materializes, because I hear it all the time. I get the call, we have the discussion, and then when the question comes, what are we going to do? How many of us willing to stand up? We are loyal to people and not the issues. And I think sometimes it doesn't buy me many friends, but I've always been very focused on no permanent friends, no permanent enemies. If we do that and we concentrate on the issue, we have to let the chip fall where it may. And I think that's where we have a problem, where we have folks that if it's my friend, I don't want to stand up against him. But my thing is, if a black snake bites or a white snake bites, it doesn't matter, it's a bite. And I think that we as a people, we've been loyal to one another to the extent that it's devastating to us as a people. And we've got folks in leadership positions that I find that we don't hold them accountable. Some of the very same people that show us disrespect because I collaborate with other groups, I find they show those groups respect, but they disrespect a group like the NAACP. And I think that we need to hold them accountable.